Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Ride and Ride Mechanic channel. How the heck are you doing today? Listen, today's topic, I want to go over something that's not very fun to go over, and if it's ever happened to you, it's a real pain in the butt. I'm talking about Hello?
Hey, listen. I screwed up.
How bad?
I screwed up really bad. It didn't come back.
Now get ready. Here we go.
Oh my gosh, that sucks so much. Oh. Welcome back. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about valleyed roller coasters. It's not a fun subject to cover, but if you've worked around roller coasters long enough, then it's something that you've probably run into. Some roller coasters, if you've just worked there short enough, you run into this problem as well, too. So we're going to talk about valleyed roller coasters today and how you recover them. So first of all, let's talk about what it means to valley a train. So when you send a train out on the course and it stops somewhere that is not in a controlled area. And by that I mean it's not a lift hill, it's not a brake zone, it's not a motor drive zone or anything like that. And it's not a spot that is meant for recovery. So one of those areas is considered valley. Some rides have areas that are built specifically to recover trains in them because the train is likely to stop at the bottom. First one that comes to mind is like a Vekoma boomerang. With the safety brakes between the loop and lift 2, this train stops all the time down there. It's a normal thing for those rides when the system faults or has problems. But at the top of that lift, there's a winch to go down and grab the train and bring it back up. It's part of the normal procedure to recover those vehicles. So it's not really considered valleyed down there. It's a pain in the butt, yeah, but it didn't stop there on its own. Now, if you were to stop the train on a boomerang in the Cobra roll, that would be valleyed. If you stopped it between the Cobra roll and the loop, where there's no brakes, that would be valleyed. But where there's brakes and a recovery system or a drive system, something along those lines, is not considered valleyed. So why do trains valley? Now, there's a lot of reasons of why trains can valley. But the number one thing that typically pushes trains into the valley spot is cold, wind, mixed with mechanical issues. Mechanical issues like a mistake done somewhere along the lines. When the temperature drops down really cold, the grease in the wheel bearings thickens up and it makes it a lot harder for those wheels to turn. If the ride already goes slow to start with, it might valley because it's now too slow. Same token is that when it's windy outside, the wind can push the train while it's moving along in the slow spots, and then it'll valley. Wind is a particularly nasty thing because as you go up in elevation, typically the wind changes higher and higher you go. When really evident as a mechanic, when you start lift walks in the morning time, you can go down in the morning at the lift base and it's nice, it's calm, maybe just a slight breeze, but hardly noticeable. And then you walk up midway up the lift hill, and it's now a stronger breeze, but still not bad. And then you get up to the very top of the lift hill, and it's windy up there, pretty windy, 15, 20 mile an hour wind up there. So we really look at the winds at higher elevations because when the train slows down, that's when it's most susceptible to things like drag, where the wind is going to slow it down. So even further, that is. So the slowest parts happen at the very top of the next element. So when you drop it off the lift hill and it goes down the drop, and then a lot of times a lot of roller coasters go into a loop. Well, at the very, very top of the loop, that is the slowest part of that area. So the train is moving its slowest. The same if it just went into a really high hill, like on a wooden roller coaster. When it goes up and over that next hill, it goes really slow over that top before it picks up speed again. Where it's the slowest, it's the most susceptible to that wind. So that is the part where you have to be careful. Before I move into the video further, I want to go through my personal experience. I did valley a train off of my own call, and it really sucked. Like that was a 28-hour day to recover that. It was bad. So I want to talk about it just because a lot of people ask me, oh, hey, what's the story behind that? Well, it started off on a really windy day, and the park didn't have really good guidelines as to what winds that we could send roller coasters and not send roller coasters in. Kind of had a rough feeling, but nothing nailed down really tight. You will notice that parks that have rides that are very touchy in the wind, they typically have it nailed down. It's in procedures. We know if the anemometer at the top of the lift, the anemometer it's a wind gauge that reports down. Once it goes above a certain speed, they know not to dispatch the ride. It's like, nope, we're not going to send it. It's too windy up there. Some rides have that built into the control system, but most rides do not. It is simply just an aftermarket anemometer that's purchased, and someone downstairs in the control room or maybe a central command is watching the wind speed, and they typically call that out on windy days. And then when they notice it get up to a certain point, they will start calling individual rides and say, hey, stop operation, it's too windy. In the morning time, we pulled out our big Premier coaster, really big floorless roller coaster, and we sent it around the track. And I wasn't sending the train around the track, it was another mechanic. But I was a supervisor at that point. The mechanic was sending it around, and then I got a call on the radio. It says, hey, come out here, I have a fault. And it's like, okay. I go out to the ride, I get up there, I say, what's wrong? And it's a short block penetration error. That's like, oh, no. So short block penetration means that the block is, on this particular ride, the next block segment, which is a mid-brake run, the train comes up and it goes into the brake. And as it starts going past its A-B proximity sensors when the train comes in, it starts doing the math and the telemetry and figuring out the speed of the train. I don't know what that speed is, but under a certain number, under a certain time value between those sensors, it locks the ride up and says, hey, it should have taken you, we'll just make a number up, it should have taken you 5 seconds to go between my A and my B set, and it took 6. So once it went past 5, it locked up and said it's taking too long. We go out to the block brake, which is 60 feet up in the air, and I get up there with another couple mechanics, because what happens is that the front 3 coaches are in the brake, and then the last 5 coaches are hanging out. In fact, some of them are still down the back side of it, downhill. So it's like, oh, we need to go through a process. There's special override commands that you can manually push in to force the brakes open all at once. And then you pull the train into the block the rest of the way and then release the brakes. We did that and said, okay, everyone pushed their manual override buttons. We forced the brakes open and we all pulled the train in, and we were pulling really hard because we did not want that thing rolling backwards. We pulled that thing in until the last coach was level with the block brake, and then it was like, okay, we let off, and then we went back to mechanic, and we said, all right, it's in, go ahead and restart the system, but don't send the train because it was really windy. On the lift hill, because the mechanic was running the ride up, so on the lift hill at the lift park, at the very top, there's another train waiting there. So now we have one in the block ahead of it, one at lift park, and I was up in the block. We had to wait, and it was like super windy. Like it would push, and like I would like drift back up against the handrails and stuff up there. 60 feet off the ground. It's not really high, but it was high. So I was like, okay, so we waited for the wind to calm down, just looking for a break in the wind. And I'm like, okay, it feels calm enough. I told him, go ahead and start the ride up and let the train out of the block brake. And he goes, okay. I told my crew up there, the guys that were with me, I said, hey, come on, let's Jamaican bobsled this thing. So we grabbed it all, and as soon as the brakes released, everyone pushed as hard as they could and gave that thing a running start and pushed it out of the block and went down, and we all watched it, and it finished the rest of the course and came back up in the safety brakes and the service brakes, and then went on down towards the station. We're like, okay. Calls me up on the radio and says, send the one on the train over? I'm like, no, not yet. And I stood out there and waited. And we just waited for about 5-10 minutes maybe. And during this time, the park was going to open in like 45 minutes to an hour. So we had a lot of people starting to show up too. And personally, I don't like people staring at a broken down ride. I don't like it myself. So I'm thinking, I'm kind of pushing myself in my head. I'm like, get the train off of Lift Park. I mean, it's the highest thing. It could be seen from everywhere in the area. So like, get the train off of Lift Park. But it was also really windy, and I didn't want to risk it. But the wind calmed down after about 10, maybe 15 minutes. And it seemed like we got in a nice low spot. And I'm like, called him up on the radio. I said, okay, send the one on the lift hill over. And he goes, you sure? And I said, yes, send it. He goes, okay. He started that thing up. It went over. It was nice and calm. Went down the drop, went up the first loop. As soon as it got halfway up that loop, the wind pushed me back. I'm like, whoa, holy crap, where did that come from?
Another cow.
Holy crap, that's not good. And then it crowned over very slow. And then it went up and over the next loop, right again. Right as it started going up that loop, the wind pushed me back again. I was like, holy crap, where did this come from?
Actually, I think that was the same one.
And I was really like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. So I'm watching it come towards us. It goes through a 0G roll. And then the last element right before the block break where I was standing, and I'm still up in the block break, I'm still 60 feet up there in the block break, is this weird, kind of looks like a cobra roll. Comes in one way, goes out the other way. I think its actual name is a pretzel roll, but don't quote me on that one. Or is that in like a serpent? I don't know. I'm not good with that sort of stuff. Everyone else probably knows but me, typically how it goes. And it came up the first side of that. I remember I was standing right in front of the train, and it came up that first side of that inversion. And as it started to crown, I can hear the chain dog and anti-rollbacks in the train go down, which is right because they're out as it's going along, just because gravity pulls it down. And as it goes up and over, they don't go down because you have G-force assisting. But in this case, there wasn't enough G-force. So it went up, and then you could hear all the chain dogs anti-rollbacks go clunk, 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 clunk as it went over. And I am just like, oh, I have never heard that sound before as that train went over that position. And I just like, it took 1,000 years for that thing to crown over, and it leveled off and then went up into the next inversion. And you heard that same sound again, clunk, 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 and then it paused for a second and then rolled backwards. And I did not know what to do. I was just sitting there looking at this train seesawing back and forth in this roll. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. The park's going to open. This is the park's premiere ride. Not by premiere. It's a B&M. But, I mean, everyone comes for this ride. And now we got to sit here an entire day with that train saddled like that. So I was just like, crap. Now, hindsight, after this event was over and we got the ride back up and running, it was the next day. Hindsight was, I talked with our state inspector, who also happened to be the old maintenance director of the park. And I was going over the story for him, and he goes, and before I was talking about it, and before I said anything, he goes, oh, did it saddle up in there in that serpentine roll or whatever that is right there next to the block break? And I'm like, yeah, it did. He goes, oh yeah, it always used to do that up there. He's like, that's why we had to put some speed wheels back on it, because it went too slow and it would valley up there all the time. And I was just like, oh man. So I said, how did you guys recover that from that position? And he says, oh, we would hire a big semi-truck wrecker to come in. And when we'd use these big cables and then we'd string them up there and we'd pull that thing through. And they'd pull it back up and over that next inversion, it would go over. That was one of the things we tried that evening. We called up and said, hey, can we get someone out here to pull this? But basically because of insurance and stuff like that, no one wanted to do it. Even when we were talking with the crane company and say, hey, can you guys pull this thing through? Even the crane company that we worked hand in hand with all the time said no, because if we were pulling that thing over and then it picked up momentum and started to go the other side, it would basically pull a crane that way, and then you could pretty much destroy a crane at that point in time too. So they were like, no way. So we got up there with some come-alongs, a chain pull. It uses a giant chain in the middle, and it's got a heavy-duty ratcheting gearbox in there. So as you twist the handle around, it ratchets the chain and gets tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter. So we went along with some of those out there, but we didn't have a lot of really good equipment to do this exact process. So we were kind of just using what we had, what was available. It wasn't like you could just run out and grab something. I mean, one of those trains is right around the 12 to 14 ton mark, which is a lot. I mean, that's 28,000 pounds. That's a lot of weight. But smaller come-alongs and stuff, chain pulls, they won't do that. They won't pull that weight. And we didn't want to mess things up further. So we talked about doing it with come-alongs, and we got up there and started hooking up everything and started moving it. And it was like, that was going to take forever to do. Just forever and a day. So those are your two options when you're talking about recovering a roller coaster. Option number one is to use chainfall, come-alongs, cables, winches, things like that, and do what's called a pull-through, which is where you take the roller coaster and you hook the coach up and you pull it through. Hopefully the problem's been resolved, which is typically mandatory, because if it's a wheel blew out or something like that and it caused the roller coaster to stop, you would want to make sure you replace that wheel before you tried to pull it through. Otherwise, it would just valley again. But if you fix everything's good. In my case, if there was no wind and you pulled it over that next element, it actually should make it right up through the next element and just continue on its way all the way back into the station. But we didn't have that luxury, unfortunately. So we got everything ready. And option number two, which is the one we opted to go with, which was dismantling the roller coaster on the track. Now this was extra difficult for us because, again, this guy was about 50 feet up in the air. During the daytime, we had to get man lifts in there. We had to get the man lifts we had in there, and we also had to emergency call in a couple of rental man lifts too, so we can get a bunch of people working on it. And then we had to send mechanics up there. We called in people that had to come in for overtime and stuff like that. And we had to start going through the train. And they said, okay, how do we want to do this? And I'm like, well, you have to take each coach off one at a time. So the only way to do that is just like we were taking a coach off for refurbishment. You have to go through and you have to uncouple the hitch assembly. And then you have to go through and you got the hitch part. Now the coach can come free on the track, but the coach can't come off the track, because remember, wheel carriers that holds all the wheels, on the inside of the wheel carrier they are shaped like this, and the rail is right in the middle of it. So you can't just take the coach off. Even if you removed all the wheels, you still can't take the coach off. So what we had to do with this was a pain. We had to work from the back of the train forward. And the reason for that is because each coach trailer hitches off the next one, all the way up until the pilot assembly up there at the front. So what we had to do is we started with coach 8, and we took out the wheel carrier pivot pin out of the side so the wheel carrier was able to separate. It wasn't quite that easy, but that's the way it sounds. It's, we just go up there and we take that pin and we pull the pin out and it separates. Those pins are in there very tight and they're very precise. Those pins are hard to get out when the train is sitting there in the work bay and the wheel carrier is hanging with nothing on it, and everything is just nice and free in the open. So 50 feet in the air with the train still loaded with weight, and by that I mean it's just sitting on the track. There was no people in it. This happened before the park opened that day. That train with all the weight sitting on there did not make things easier. We had to go to the one side that was the high side because the train was kind of sitting at an angle. We had to go to the high side and basically use straps and a come along on that side and basically chain the wheel carrier to the track. And then the same thing with the hitch assembly. We had to chain it to the track as well, both sides, so it couldn't go left, it couldn't go right, it couldn't go forward, it couldn't go backwards. We had to pin it right there. And then we had to go towards the back of the coach and on a track tie, put some wood underneath there, dunnage underneath there, and use a jack and basically start to lift pressure off of that corner of the wheel carrier. And it's a very finite thing because you'll never see the pressure go away. You'll just kind of like, we kind of basically like grabbed the road wheels and tried twisting them and kept jacking it up until the road wheels started to twist. And then it was like, okay, pressure's off of it now. And then we had to remove the plates, remove the safety in the back that holds the pin in, and then we had to take that pin, and this was really hard to do on 50 feet in the air, had to extract the pin all the way out. And the pin is about 20 inches, 22 inches long, something like that. It's a big pin, and it's about the size of a soda can in the center. So we had to pull that thing out. And now that we had it pulled out, the train was sitting on the dunnage, and then the wheel carrier was just sitting in its cavity. So what we had to do now is we had to take the wheel carrier, and we had to chain that wheel carrier to the track now that it was free. We had to chain that one down, and we very carefully removed the brass bushings that are on each side. And then once that was done, then at that point the crane was able to come over. We were able to wrap slings around it, and then they were able to take some pressure off of it, and then we started undoing all the cables and straps and all that stuff. And then we had to still move the wheel carrier out of the way a little bit, and at that point the coach was free. And then the crane picked it up, took it over, and set it down just outside the gate so we could pick it up with a truck. At that point, we could use a forklift, essentially, but we took them up with a crane and we set them as close to the maintenance area as we could, knowing that we'd have to move them again. And then the crane came back over, and we hooked a smaller strap up to the wheel carrier right through the pivot bushing where we took the thing out, grabbed that guy, unstrapped it from the track, picked it up, set it down over there also. Great, that was cool. That was coach number 8. We still had 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, and then the fun one is the pilot assembly. The pilot coach is coaches 1 and 2, because all the coaches trailer hitch off of each other. But when you get to the very back of the train or the very front of the train, depending on what type of roller coaster it is, you have what's called a pilot assembly of some sort. Each manufacturer calls it something different. But it's the end. It's a weird assembly where the end is. And in B&M's case, what they do is coach number 2, instead of having a standard hitch fork in there where it would meet with a cardan block for the 2-axis and coupling, they put in what's called a pilot shaft. And the pilot shaft is this very long bullet-shaped shaft, very impressive when it's out of the coaster. It's like 3 feet precision machined, this big around, and what it does is the entire front coach has a bore that goes all the way through it, and that coach pivots on that pilot shaft the whole way. So, interesting fact, the pilot coach does not articulate at all. So when the coaches go, coach number 8 to 7, 7 to 6, 6 to 5, 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to 2, and then 2 and 1 are solid. They act together. They do not act independently, and they can twist, but they act together. That allows for that chordal effect. That's the most it happens over the entire train is that one in particular coach, because It's a straight line between the two carriers, essentially. You can't do anything else with it. We did all of them the same and got to that one, and we just had to get some more stuff to basically do it times 2 in one spot. And then we lifted that whole assembly off in one shot and set it down. That process, we started, the crane showed up as the park was closing, and we started setting up. I don't remember what time it was, but we worked all the way through the night until about 8:30 the next morning. And then at that point in time, 8:30 came around, we were just finishing up getting everything put away, and we had the coaches on the back side, and we were able, like, they had to go back up in the work bay after that. We actually, I don't remember what happened from that. I think we just used the crane in the work bay to lift it back up and put it up there. And then shortly after we were done, the mechanic for the ride the next morning had already PM'd the other train, because we were just down to one train at that point on the ride. And then about an hour after we got out of there, started cycling the next train, and the ride went back up and running. At this point in the video, if you haven't already, please make sure you like and subscribe and give me some comments down there. Let me know if you got any fun stories to add on to these. And then let me know if you want to see something for topics in the future too. I'm always up for new stuff. I've got a list of things that I'm making, but sometimes somebody says something and I'm like, oh yeah, let's do that one real quick. That really sounds like fun. I do enjoy getting that information. You guys come up with a lot of good ideas for videos, so let me know if you got them. You can also email me at ryantheridermechanic@yahoo.com. Let's get back into the video. That was a really crappy time. That was a 28-hour day. I did not enjoy it at all. I don't wish that on anybody. Anytime I see a Valid train, it's just like, oh, man, that sucks. But those are your two options. You can take it apart on the spot, or you could try to pull it through to the next area. Okay, so let's go through some other examples. Let's use a launch coaster, something that goes over a top hat preferably. We could use anything like Top Thrills, King Ka. There's lots of them. Rita, stuff like that. So when they stall up on top, right, when they go up and over the top and then they stall up there, is that considered valid? Yes, it is. That is considered valid. Even though it's at the very top, it's at the highest point of the ride, that is still considered valid because there's nothing you can do but go up to the top and push it. That's valid. It's between drive areas. It's not meant to be in a place. And typically there's not really a method of recovery up there. It's simply just someone has to go up there, whether there's an elevator or a cable lift to get up to it. You have to get up there and manually push the train one way or the other until it rolls either forward or backwards. Again, these are areas outside of movement control zones. So if it stops in booster wheels, it's not valid. If it stops in LSM or LIM motors, it's not valid. That brings up swing rides. Not actual swings, but roller coasters like impulse coasters, like where I got this chair from. Anything that's driven at the low spot and it swings from side to side, Wicked Twister, the Flash, things like that, those rides can't valley because when they stop down at the bottom, when the ride faults out and it just stops out on the track down there at the bottom, it's still in its drive motor assembly, so it can't valley. It's always in a state of being able to be moved. Sometimes you can't get the ride to move it, but it can still be moved. So it's not really valid at that point in time. While I'm on that subject, Top Thrills 2, when they say each cycle gets a rollback, it's not a rollback. Come on. Rollback is when you try to go over the top and fail to make it. It's the failure that makes it a rollback. It can roll back, but it won't be every cycle. If it goes up and is told to stop halfway up the tower and did and rolled backwards at that point in time, that's just to start a swing 2. That's all that is. That's not a rollback. But you could still actually achieve a rollback on Top Thrill 2. So a train can literally valley anywhere on the track. pretty much anywhere. Given the right conditions, it can stop anywhere out there. Weird places, place you don't normally think about all the time. It's like the drop. Like you go over the lift hill, you start rolling down, and then hit the drop. And the train slows to a stop before it gets down to the bottom. Highly unlikely? Highly unlikely. Possible? Yes, it is possible. Anywhere on the track, that train could stop. Everyone's worst fears. Upside down in the loop. Could it stop there? It's like, yep, it could stop there too. Anywhere on the track, that train could stop given the right conditions. We're talking something mechanically broke and there's a ton of drag on the assembly now. It's not going to go through those elements well. And depending on how fast it was going and where it was, it might stop in the worst place possible. That won't be a good thing. Things that people like to say like, oh, it valleyed there. It's like a block break. No, that's not valid because it's designed to stop there. It's designed to be released from there too. When it's up at the top of the lift hill, it valleyed. Nope, that is simply just stopped up there because it's still on the lift hill, even if it can't grab onto the chain for some reason, like something stuck in the chain dog. It's not valleyed. It's still in a place that can easily be recovered. You won't need a man basket or crane or anything to get people off of the ride when it stops in one of those locations. If you need a man basket or crane or something to get people off of there, that's valid for sure. The most common forms of valleying is actually in the place you would least expect it. That's actually around the station area in the controlled zones, the places there where there's lots of booster drives and things like that. You can stop a train just right in between all the booster drives typically. On a lot of rides, you can. The floorless coaster that we worked on, it had 8 booster motors in the station, and it had 8 booster motors in the transfer track right behind the station. And we found out, actually I've been working there for probably 6 or 7 years before it actually happened. Operations, they just took their hands off the buttons at the right time, dispatching the next train in from transfer to the station. And it just so happens the train just barely made it out of that first set of booster motors and did not make it into the next set of the booster motors. And they said the train valleyed. It's like, oh my gosh, where'd the train valley? Well, it's halfway in the station, halfway out of the station. And I'm like, push on the buttons. That's not valid. What's your problem? No, it's valid. You gotta come out here and push it. Okay, we get some guys. Let's go out and push it. Like, what is this? They have to have, maybe they hit a ride stop or something like that. This is BS. So we go up to the station, and I look at this fully loaded train of people sitting there, and the nose, the hull of the train, the nose of it, is sitting like that far away from the first set of booster motors. And I was like, what? And then I walk to the back of the train real quick as I go out there, and I go to the back, and the butt end of the train, right where the drive friction surfaces are on the side of it, because it drives on the side of those. It's like that far out of the last set of booster motors. So given that entire train, it was literally off by that much. It was dead center of those booster motors by that much. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. So we got like 4 mechanics and a couple of operational supervisors because they are cleared to walk out on those catwalk areas. And told them to dispatch, and everything kicked on and started going. And then we pushed the train forward. That was like 4 inches. Not even that, was 2 inches. And then the wheels suddenly grabbed and it pulled the train in the rest of the way. It's just like, oh my gosh. One thing I had was the SLC. SLCs have to, like most rides, they have to make the lift. Making the lift is a term that's used to say that the train has to go up the lift hill high enough for the chain dog to engage. So a lot of times the chain dog is back around coach number 4 or 5, somewhere in that area. So you got to get the train a big boost of speed out of the station for it to go up high enough for the chain dog to actually latch on underneath and continue to pull the train out. Now, on most rides, this term is referred to because you send the train out of the station and it typically goes down a little bump and it goes out and it picks up speed before it makes the lift, before it gets to the lift, so it can make the lift. But on the SLC, we had several times where the booster motors had come out of tolerance, and they're supposed to be zero gap, which means they're closed completely. And the brake fins are about 10 millimeters wide, 12 millimeters wide. So there is 6 millimeters of crush on each one of the drive wheels. But those drive wheels, sometimes they get worn down and they get a gap between them. And we adjust them closer and closer and closer, but sometimes we don't do it because of whatever reason, running behind and this and that. So they start actually opening up a gap, an air gap between them. And what happened is that the front booster wheel drives at the front of the station had a pretty big gap on them because the wheels were, I believe they were worn out in that scenario. They're at their minimum dimension. They couldn't be tightened anymore. And dispatched a train, and the train went up, and it went up, up, up. Well, it didn't make the lift. So it's a problem because in front of the chain dog, there's anti-rollbacks. Well, it didn't make it high enough up the lift hill for the chain dog to grab a hold of it, but it did make it high enough for the anti-rollbacks to grab. So it went up, 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 and stopped because the anti-rollbacks grabbed it, but the chain dog wasn't grabbing it. So it was stuck there. It was the weirdest valleyed that I could possibly think of because it was in a controlled area. The lift was there, everything was like that, but we could not get it forward under its own power to go there. We could not unlatch the anti-rollbacks to move it backwards. So we had to evacuate the train where it sat. The front part got up on the man basket going up the lift hill. The rear got off in the station, and then there was like 3 rows in the middle between the SEP platform and the station, 3 or 4 rows that we had to get ladders and stuff and help the people had to get down on a ladder and get off the ride. That happened one more time, but that time it was because for some reason the chain dog had slid over and was actually underneath the chain trough. It was just over by a little bit, but we were like, oh, the chain dog didn't bite in for some reason. And it wasn't until after the full evacuation we got done. The supervisor at the time, he got up there on top of the train. Everything was off, but he literally just kicked the chain dog with his foot, and it just went back, clunk, and fell in. And it was just like, too bad we can't do that with people on it. That would have made the recovery so much faster. Is there a danger with valley coasters? Absolutely, there is, depending on how the coaster has valleyed. So a lot of times they do happen in the lowest spot. They simply lose their momentum and they come to a rest at the lowest spot. On a lot of rides, the lowest spot is close to the ground. So you can get some tall ladders and stuff like that, maybe a small man basket if needed, and get people off relatively quickly. If it's in a spot where there's a lot of twisting and turning and the coach is at odd angles, depending on the circumstances, you might need to have the fire rescue department come in and help extract people. So this would be done if the coach was at a really odd angle and you had to get people off of it. And searching for some photos to use for this, I came across photos where the roller coaster had stopped through a corkscrew and people were full 90 degrees. And I found other ones where they were fully upside down, and it shows the fire department there. It's like, yeah, that's tough because you have to get up there. You have to get a harness around them underneath the restraint. And then while that's going on, a mechanic has to go up there too. And they physically, in the back of the seat, they have to dismantle one restraint and they have to completely open it while the firefighter person is on the other side dealing with securing the guest. Really tricky. Luckily, I never had to deal with any of those things, but they look like an absolute nightmare when they happen. One of the other dangers that's out there is the risk of collision. Anytime you valley a roller coaster, the ride's in motion. So it goes up from block A to B, B to C, and then it doesn't make block D. And it rolls backwards It's still in Block C. Well, a lot of times on these rides, while it's in Block C, you have a train in Block B that's approaching its boundary edge. And everyone, myself included, man, I hope that stops. I really do. And then you have stories that come out which are truly unfortunate, of things where we had a valley train and maintenance got out there, and through a miscommunication, I'm talking about the Smiler incident, through a miscommunication, the block was reset without knowing that there was a train stuck on the track. And then they sent the next train around. That was one of the reasons why a lot of parks went to say that if you had to do a block reset, you had to 100% take everybody off the ride regardless. Even if it was a simple, oh yeah, this is really quick, just nope. Everyone had to get off the ride. So you had to evacuate, do whatever you needed to before that block reset could happen. Unfortunately, that rule was made out of some bad times and some unfortunate circumstances, but valleyed roller coasters do present a large room for error in that instance that you don't want to deal with. So you always have to get the people off, make it safe before you proceed any further. Let's see, where I worked, we had a large Tivoli coaster. Probably saying that wrong. It's probably Tivoli, whatever. Made by Zaire. Probably saying that wrong too. Everyone always corrects me on this stuff. I don't take it personally though. So we had a large family Tivoli coaster that the thing was just cold-blooded. Just absolutely cold-blooded. This thing had sealed wheel bearings that it used all over the place. They were all nylon wheels on a steel track, so it was the lowest friction possible. The thing was 20 coaches long, so I mean, it was very long. But they used sealed bearings throughout all the wheels, which was great for keeping the elements out, but unfortunately those sealed bearings came with just standard MP grease inside of them that we didn't really have any control over. So in the morning time warming it up, it would take a long time to warm up to get those wheels right, and sometimes that wasn't enough. Sometimes you would send that over there. I valleyed that coaster several times myself. Sometimes you get it all nice and warmed up, say, yep, it'll make it, and then you send it over and it doesn't make it. Might have been too much corrosion out on the track, dirt, things like that. I know we've had plenty of times that coaster valleyed because a piece of tree got onto the track. We had palm trees around there, and the palm trees would drop the big fronds, the big palm fronds. And one of the fronds fell down on the track, and that caused it to valley. I know we've had all sorts of other stuff happen with that coaster too. Luckily, that one wasn't super heavy, so that one we could just get 8 people out there, got kind of a running start, and just pushed it manually by hand back into the station. Luckily, it was all low, so that was easy. We had a Gerstlauer spinning coaster. It was closer towards the off-season of the ride, and we had the NDT company out. For NDT stands for non-destructive testing. We had the NDT company out, and they were out there doing their inspection on that ride. So their inspection, what they have to do every year is they climb all over the ride, get to all aspects of it, and they have to do a visual weld inspection. They're just looking for cracks out there, which most of the time they could find them if they are out there, but manufacturers don't want the paint peeled off of those things because it makes a big mess, and then you have to paint back, and then you leave the chance for corrosion to get in there and start rusting, and it's a bad thing. So a lot of this track and structure stuff are just done with very close visual inspections. I mean, you have to be on the track to do it. Our company had just gotten done doing that ride, and they'd given a clean bill of health. They said, yep, nothing's wrong with it, during the week when the park was closed. And on Friday, I think it was, we went to go run it up in the morning time. What had happened was that the mechanic had gone up there and they'd done all the block resets, wasn't paying attention to the ride and all the aspects of it, because he went up, did the block resets, sent the first coach around, and the first coach went through the, I think it was the 4th brake zone. And in the 4th brake zone, there was the NDT company the guy left his sweater on the track. Just a regular, sweater like you would wear. He left that on the track. And the mechanic didn't catch it on run-up. So he sent that thing around. The coach hit the sweater. Those coaches are very lightweight compared to most things. It went down in what I call the clogged toilet bowl. It was an element where it basically swirled down and then went over and then kind of swirled back up. So I was like, oh, it looks like water in a toilet bowl when it's clogged. It goes down and then comes back up. Anyways, it did not make it out of the clogged toilet bowl, and it valleyed down there. And then unfortunately, that was again one of those scenarios where the park was going to open up in a couple of hours, but it was light enough to where we had enough come-alongs, chain pulls, things like that, to recover that. So we got out there, and I remember it was my boss and the welder, because we were behind on that day, I think. The boss and the welder were out there, and they had come along that thing, and they were getting it pulled up, that element back up to the next block segment to let it go again. I think they went backwards to the fourth zone once they pulled the sweater out of it. My boss at the time, he had come from other parks, and he had worked on a premier spaghetti bowl. And he said, when it came to valleyed trains, he said that train valleyed in every single spot in that spaghetti bowl that you could possibly think of. He said, we knew exactly where to put the crane and the equipment to get that train out of anywhere. He said it happened so much up there. I was just like, ooh, that was a pain. But he was out there, and they were just up on the track pulling that coach around. He looked like he was having fun. Was kind of stressful, but he did kind of look like he was in his element when I took a picture of him. We had a wooden coaster, GCI, and I remember I worked the morning shift, and it was Fright Fest. So after the shift was over, my wife and I think a couple of her friends, they drove out to the park, and then so I went into the park to have fun with them. Then in the evening time, I saw the evening supervisor coming out from the gate behind the wooden roller coaster, and I saw people coming out with him. And I was like, oh, what's going on? We had to do an SEP in there? And he says, the train valleyed. I was like, oh no. And he goes, well, it hilled. I was like, what? He laughed. He says, it hilled. It actually stopped up on the high spot of a high bank turn. So not the valley on each side, but where it goes up and does a high turn, it got stuck right there. That one, there was something about, there was a deficiency in the laminate stack, and for some reason the coach was able to force its way out. One coach was able to pull its upstop wheel out of the track. So you had all the coaches were fine except for one coach had its upstop on top of the track. And it was out, and it was hitting bolts and stuff like that. So it just slowed down to a stop, and they didn't know why. Of course, there was a bunch of sheared off broken bolts and stuff like that around the track, but it just goes to show on those type of things, no one really knew what happened. It wasn't even a scary moment for them. They're just like, it slowed down and stopped for some reason. Or if you tell people like, oh, you got an upstop wheel out of the track, most people would flip out, understandably so, but not the case in that one. So that was where wooden roller coaster valleyed, or hilled in that case. But that's never a term we've ever used, so I'm going to stick with valleyed on that one, because it stopped out on the track where it was not meant to stop. Valleyed. Let's see, more recently, iron gwazi. I don't know what a gwazi is or why it's iron, but that's neither here nor there. Anyways, iron gwazi out there valleyed, and so people say, hey, did you see that? I'm like, no, I didn't. I looked into a little bit, and it's like, oh, that train that had valleyed had just gone through a long refurbishment, very long refurbishment. And it, from what I gather, I could be wrong on this, but what I gather, they said they overpacked the wheel bearings. I was like, oh yeah, that is exactly what would happen, because roller coasters don't like a lot of grease in their wheel bearings. Most of the time, it's very, very small. Not even a quarter what you would put in a normal wheel bearing for a car. And it's a special grease too. But a lot of times what set me off was the very long refurbishment. Been there, done that. Things pile up in the park, schedules get behind. You pull a train off, it's only supposed to take 4 months, and it ends up taking a year. I've been there, I've done that, it's no fun. But what you get out of those particular trains, you'd think, well, you had a year to make sure everything was absolutely perfect. It's like, nope. Because what happened is during that time frame, you were going 10,000 directions and people were being pulled every single which way. So people only had a fraction of the time to put into it. And what you lacked was consistency and continuity in the plan. And then what happens is the little things slip through the cracks. The little things, like they gave somebody all the wheel bearings and said, here, pack these. And somebody just went, okay. They got their grease packing tool out and put the bearings in there, slammed them down, like packed, and they went to the next one. Boom, 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 boom. Nobody thought to say or thought to ask how much grease goes in those bearings. And you get a valid train out of the other side. Yeah, that stuff happens. Yeah, just because a train spends a long time in refurbishment doesn't mean it's going to be absolutely perfect when it's done. In fact, those are typically the worst ones when they come out. I've done a handful of QC checks on trains myself that have been in refurbishment for a very long time, and I'm finding stuff on it like, what the heck, people? Come on. Like, normally my list of like things to fix on there is like about a page. Like, here, you got to fix all this stuff. And then trains like that, I'll pull like 3 pages out. Like, lots of problems. It takes a crew like an extra 4 or 5 days to actually fix that stuff back up and get it to where I'm happy with it again. And then you have some other ones that are out of your control. Things that happen, like sometimes you have a freak wheel delaminate. And some rides, it makes noise. It causes the ride to run uneven. You get a thumping as you go around, even when they're really bad delaminations from the road wheels. But some rides, that's just enough to bring them to a stop. So it's like, okay, you had a bad road wheel, and that caused the ride to valley. That does happen. And sometimes, like on California, it used to be California Screamin' over at Disney's California Adventure, they were going along. The train actually hit a backpack at the base of the loop. It fell off from, must have been the train before it, fell off and landed square on the track. And then the next train came back behind it and picked it up, and it got mangled up between the reaction fins and the wheel carriers and stuff and started dragging it down. Well, didn't quite have enough momentum to make it all the way back up the next hill. And if it was still mangled up in there, definitely wouldn't fit between the stators and the rest of the train, because that's a very tight fit on those rides. And then it rolled backwards. And then on the video, don't want to play the audio, it's just there's a lot of screaming. People very afraid, obviously. But it goes back to that, like, okay, you valley between those two spots. Like the Smiler, your brain attentions, and it's like your brain turns and says, oh, I really hope that the control system is working properly and it stops the ride. Like, really hope. It's a basic thing, but even though, like, when it all goes south, that's the last thing, right? You're like, oh my gosh, please don't let this be a perfect storm. And then you have two trains collide. Like, we don't want that to happen. And then there was another one that I wasn't present for, but there was a boomerang that stopped up in the Cobra Roll. Not a completely unusual thing. I mean, they do valley in that Cobra Roll from time to time. But the reason it had valleyed is because the cable on lift 1, lifting the train up, had snapped. So it broke. It broke before the catch wagon let go, but it was still really high up the lift hill. So almost to the point where the catch wagon would let go, but not 100% up there. And then the cable snapped, and then it came back down. And the reason it stopped in there, because it went right through all the brakes, that happens on those rides. It went right through all the brakes, or heck, maybe they were open at that time. But the reason why it stuck in that Cobra Roll up there is because the catch wagon was still attached. Now, the catch wagon on a boomerang, once it bites onto the back of the train, it can articulate this way with the track, because the track bends as it goes up and then it flattens down. But it can't articulate this way. So it goes up into that cobra roll, and then it twists really hard to one side. It can't do that. So it went up in that cobra roll, and then as soon as that started to twist, it just took everything and bent everything all apart. And that is the reason that stuck up in that cobra roll. It's because the catch wagon was deformed to the track. It wasn't good, but that caused the boomerang to valley up there. I think that's going to do it for this video. I'm Ryan the Ride Mechanic, and remember, stay off the air gates. Bye.